Hey everybody, Grip here, and for today's product review I want to talk about this little device. It's called the FOB. The FOB is an acronym that stands for Fletching Only Better, and it's been around for a while. It was actually invented over a decade ago by an aerospace engineer by the name of Paul Morris, and here in the last few years it's recently been acquired by Advanced Archery Solutions out of South Carolina. They've rebranded it and put it back out on the market. The idea behind it is a fin stabilized ring that fits right between the nock and the shaft of the arrow, and as you can see, it just slides right on the back end of the arrow. Before we get started with any of the test shooting, I wanted to talk a little bit about the FOB and some of its characteristics. So as we discussed, it is a ring with the three fins that are slightly offset to give your arrow the stabilizing spin. The FOB website talks about some of the advantages, and since the FOB is shorter than a lot of your vanes, they say it gives less wind drift, so for your left and rights. There are some particular, I don't want to call them pros or cons, I want to call them do's and don'ts with the FOB. Clearly, because this is a ring on the back of the arrow, you have to shoot a drop away rest. So for you full capture rest guys, if you're a fan of the Whisker Biscuit, this is not going to be an object that you're going to want to do. Clearly it's not going to work as it comes right through the rest. So you got to shoot a drop away rest. Now what they do is they provide a clear FOB that is just a simple ring, and this is your clearance tester. So before you ever work on shooting the FOB, you put the ring, the testing ring, on the arrow shaft, and it will slide up and down the arrow shaft. So once you have, I'll just leave this FOB in there, but once you have the FOB in and you knock the arrow on the bow, then you can slide this ring up and down the shaft of the arrow to make sure that you're going to get clearance. Once you do that test, then you're ready to start shooting. One of the advantages that I have found with the FOB is the ease of installation. They simply pop right off the back. The nock fits inside of the FOB. There's a little lip on the back edge. I'll flip it over for you. A little lip on the back edge, and the shaft of the arrow fits, back of the shaft of the arrow fits inside of that opening. So you insert the nock on the back end, and then you simply install the nock and push it in snug, and that arrow is fletched. It's just that easy. No glue, no fletching jig. It just pops on right on the back of the arrow. One of the interesting things about it is, say you're shooting and you have a little mishap and you break an arrow shaft, you can simply walk up, pull this off the back of the arrow, put it on a different arrow, you save your fletching, and you now have the same fletching off a broken arrow you can now put on a different arrow shaft. So that to me is a good selling point. Some of the other, again, possible limitations for the FOB is there are only two sizes. So there is the size that fits your standard carbon, which would be this one, and then there's a smaller size for your smaller diameter carbons. One of the other things to realize is, again, this is going to be primarily designed as a tool for your hunting arrow. I would not 3D with this because it puts a big ring for my competitors to shoot at in the target, and they can easily hit this and damage it. And your vanes, of course, are going to have a smaller surface area for an arrow to hit. And this, again, would not be something that I would compete with in 3D. This is going to be strictly for a hunting arrow. I will say, though, that the ring is kind of flexible. And it has great memory, so you can kind of squeeze it and mash it, and it will take some damage, but ultimately, for 3D, it's not something that I would use. I wanted to know, how does the FOB compare to the Blazer vane? The Blazer vanes are probably, if not the most popular hunting vane on the market, one of the most popular on the market today. So I wanted to see how they compared up with the Blazers. I wanted to see how one FOB would compare in weight to 3 Blazer vanes. I wanted to check the arrow's front of center, or FOC, to see if there was a big difference. I then wanted to check them for accuracy to see if the FOB with a field point would group with the blazer vanes at 20 yards. I then wanted to check for trajectory to see if was there increased drag that would slow the arrow down at 50 yards. I also wanted to see how well they would stabilize a broadhead. And I wanted to ultimately then do, after talking to someone at the archery shop, they thought that the FOB would make a very loud whistle. So I wanted to do what I call the whistle test. So here are my results on how the FOB performs. Okay, we're here in the workshop and I was checking weights of the blazers and the FOBs, and I weighed a bunch of blazers, 3 each, and I found out that 3 blazers weigh on average right at 20 grains. I have 2 tubes of FOBs, the orange and the yellow FOB. Ended up buying a second tube, and I have found out that they range anywhere from about 24 to 26. The very lightest one I had was 23 grains. The heaviest FOB I had was 26 grains, but almost all of them were coming in at either 25 or 24 or 25 grains. That's only a difference of about 4 or 5 grains. That is not that big of a difference. I checked the FOC of a dozen arrows. 6 of them were blazers and 6 of them were fletched in the FOBs. And I found out that the biggest difference I could come up with was just under 0.5% on the FOC, which for my archery skills, it's not going to be that big of a difference. Based on those numbers, the FOBs seem to be matching up pretty well with the blazer vanes so far. For my next test, I wanted to see how well the FOBs and blazers would group together at 20 yards. So let's roll some of that awesome arrow footage. So here I'm trying to shoot the blazer before the FOB so that I don't damage the FOB, but as you can see, sometimes plans don't work out as you think they're going to. Here I shot the blazer first and then the FOB behind, and still kind of ringed the FOB inside the arrow that was already there. So they seem to be grouping about the same as my blazers. So as you can tell from the footage, the blazers hit right with the FOBs and the FOBs hit right with the blazers. Whenever I did my job as the guy driving the bow, they hit together. So my results show that the FOBs and the blazers field points at 20 yards all hit right where they need to be. My next test was downrange trajectory. Wanted to see if the FOBs at range would carry the same as the arrows fletched with blazers. And here are the results. Okay, here's my first group at 50, and this one was definitely me. I felt that when I shot. I knew the pin was a little low of the line, and I wasn't real concerned about my right and left. I basically was just holding the pin on this line, and if it drifted a little right and left, that was okay, but as long as my pin was on that line, I was letting it go. Again, this test is for the difference in trajectory. Is there a difference between the FOBs and the blazers? So With this limited sample size of only 6 arrows, I would say right now, here's 4, 2 of each, 2 blazers and 2 fobs, and as you can see right here, this blazer went inside of this fob, so and this fob almost caught this blazer. So this is what they call a fob and hood, as it goes inside the fob. But of the group, there's 4 right here that I can get my thumb and get my finger around. So I would say with this limited sample size that at 50 yards there doesn't seem to be that big of a difference in trajectory. Two things I want to talk about that are kind of unique to the fob. Number one, because that fob sits so close to the knock, and of course your standard vanes are well out in front of the knock, you will notice a difference in your anchor point. Not necessarily how it changes your anchor point, but it just feels different. This ring tucks in on my chin. I'll go ahead and do it again. That ring tucks into my chin, and I can feel it. There's just a little bit more pressure, so maybe something to look out for. I'll go ahead and anchor in again. So as you can see, it's tucked in, and it sits right here on my chin, and it just gives me a little bit of pressure. I haven't really noticed any issues with that sideways pressure causing any accuracy issues, but it is something to think about, depending on your anchor point. Of course, with the vanes, they're set up in front, so you don't get that much side pressure. So if you shoot a very high let-off bow, that could be something to look out for. The other thing to pay attention to is your knock pinch. I shoot a loop, a lot of people do, but if you shoot a very short axle-to-axle bow, when that string comes back, it can pinch, and that tight angle that you get with your short axle-to-axle bows, that string can come back and pinch that fob, and that can push the fob forward and start to come off your string. So they do mention that on their website about the knock pinch, and they do have a couple solutions. One would be to widen out the D-loop to get that string a little further away from the fob. But if you are, so far the bows that I've shot the fob out of have all been right at or over 30-inch axle to axle. So if you're over that, as far as I can tell, if you're over a 30-inch axle to axle bow, then you're probably okay. Now if you shoot one of the shorter axle to axles, it may be something to look out for. So just keep that in mind. All right, now that we got that covered, let's do some more shooting. Next test is maybe my favorite, called the whistle test. And after talking with a guy at the local pro shop, he wondered about the sound that the fobs would make when airborne. And he thought that they would make a very loud whistling sound. So I thought I'd test that. So you'll see in the footage that what I did was I shot 2 blazers, then 2 fobs, and just for fairness, I had one arrow that was fletched in 4-inch feathers, real feathers, and I shot that one as the last one just to give another comparison. As far as I'm concerned, listening to the arrows fly by the camera, I could tell a difference in the sound, but volume-wise, I think they were about the same. I know standing behind them, I couldn't tell a difference. They all sounded, decibel-wise, they all sounded about the same. All right, I know what you're thinking, that Those tests are great, but none of it means diddly if the FOB can't stabilize a broadhead. I wanted to test how well the FOB did with a fixed bladed head. So without getting into a brand name war, this is a fairly popular fixed bladed head, 3 blades with about 1.1 inch cutting diameter, shot into 2 little pieces of paper so that you can actually see that the blades are cutting the paper. You can tell that it was a broadhead. So let's go to that footage. Okay, there was the first shot, 20 yards. You can see the lines in the paper. And here's my next shot with the FOB at 20 yards, same broadhead. Based on those results in the broadhead test, if you have a properly tuned bow and you're shooting appropriately spined arrows, I would have no reservations shooting a fixed bladed broadhead with the FOB. Well, that pretty much wraps up all of my testing that I did with the FOB. Just a quick summary as far as the weight is concerned. One FOB weighs pretty close to what 3 blazer vanes would weigh. They group at 20 yards with blazers. They seem to carry at longer ranges, out to 50 yards. They hit pretty much at the same elevation as the blazer vanes do. They have a distinct sound in flight. Maybe, I've listened to it a bunch of times, maybe they are just a tad louder, but definitely not anything that I would consider to be game spooking loud. But they do have their own unique sound. And on the broadhead test, they stabilize the fixed bladed broadheads pretty well. Now, I did have one other finding that I originally didn't want to test, but I think it stands to mention, is for my turkey hunting setup, I was shooting a rather large broadhead, a rather large cutting diameter broadhead. And as you know, a lot of times it can be tricky to get those broadheads to fly. So out of the arrow setups that I had 3 blazer vanes, and I was having difficulty getting them to hit where I wanted. So knowing what I know about fletching some arrows, and some of you may have done this as well, I decided to add some vanes, length of vanes, and I went to a 4 fletched arrow with 2 4-inch vanes and 2 3.5-inch vanes. And this setup, with the poundage that I was using and the broadhead that I was working with, this worked, and this straightened them out, and I got those broadheads to fly pretty close to field point accurate. And then it dawned on me, well, a FOB is extra vane stabilization. So what if, and I don't know if I'm the first person to ever think of this, I kind of hope I am, but what if you put a FOB on the back of an arrow already fletched with, say, 3 blazer vanes? So that's what I did. I figured, the FOBs are fins and they stabilize, and as long as I would line the fins up so that they are in between each of the blazer vanes, my question was, how would that work? Much to my surprise, they straightened out the broadhead flight to the same amount as the larger 4 fletched arrow did. And in essence, I went from 3 to 6 vanes in a matter of seconds. Knowing that, in my opinion, am I going to be a total and 100% FOB convert? Probably not. I will always shoot the blazer vanes and various other combinations of vanes and probably real feathers for the rest of my archery career. But because they're so convenient, they do work, I really think that the FOB has their place. I will, from here on out, I will always have a tube or 2 of FOBs at my disposal so that I can easily fletch an arrow. I can easily fix possible issues that I have with other arrows, And to me, they're just a handy thing to have lying around your archery workshop. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and this answers a lot of the questions about FOBs. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the deer woods.